All right, so this has happened to the best of us. You do your research, you read the forums, you hear all the explanations of why you need to be shooting in 24p. It's more cinematic, it's what the movies are shot in, you get more bits per frame. All these reasons for why you need to be shooting 24p, and you're like, all right, I'm doing it. So with a couple of quick button pushes and a flip of a dial, you are ready to shoot at 24 frames a second. And then you review the footage and you're like, why does this look like a stop motion slideshow? It just looks horrible. That is because your shutter speed is off. Now you're thinking, I thought this video was supposed to be about the drone. No, it is. Give me just a second, I'm getting there. Now the reason your shutter speed is so important at these lower frame rates is because in order to fill in the empty space between the frames, because only 24 frames a second, that's pretty low, you need to take into account the motion blur to give stuff more movement that is lost because of missing frames. If you're shooting at 120 frames a second, you're not missing anything. You're getting all the information and it's all going to be crystal clear and you're going to see it all. 24 frames a second, there's a huge gap between each frame and you have to fill that with something. If your shutter speed is too slow, then you're going to miss that information. So basically, let's imagine that you've got a subject moving that direction. 24 frames a second, and here's frame 1, and over here's frame 2. So this is a timeline. 1, 2, 3, those are 24ths of a second. And this subject's gonna move all the way over here as it goes through the timeline. So as it moves this direction, this 24th of a second here, if you're shooting it like 1/600th of a second, your shutter speed now, not your frame rate, this is gonna have a motion blur of about that much. Just a little bit of motion blur. And then the next frame is gonna appear all the way over here. And there's gonna be a skip, missing information there that is gonna look way off if you don't shoot right. So what happens if you then lower your shutter speed to 1/50th, 1/60th of a second, which is about where you need to be putting your shutter speed for shooting at this lower frame rate, that allows the motion blur to span almost halfway to the next scene, and you're only missing this much information as opposed to like 98% of the information. You're missing closer to 50% of the information, which is a lot less perceivable with general motion and panning and different things like that. Now you will notice some choppiness on certain shots, certain movements, which you can even notice these in Hollywood movies, is that when they pan or when they zoom in, if you look at stuff that's not intended to be focused on, you can see it kind of skipping across the screen. Now they typically do a very good job of keeping the subject, the part that you're supposed to be focusing on, they keep the movement very controlled for that, so where you can't see any choppiness. So how do you get your shutter speed down without blowing out all the highlights? If you just try and crank your shutter speed down manually, you're gonna way overexpose everything. So what you need to do is get you an ND filter. This here, you can see it's a little bit darker. And this here is a 15 stop one, which you can't see through at all, really. There we go, now it's exposing correctly. So, now we're way blown out. So for drone flying in particular, there can be some shots where it's rotating or panning that this choppiness becomes crazy accentuated. It's gonna be so apparent this choppiness as you're rotating or moving across something, and it just looks terrible, and you try and make it work as best you can, but most of the time you can't ever unsee it. Whether other people see it or not, you always see it when you're watching back that footage. Now that's where this product here comes into play. This is a ND filter set by Freewell, and it comes with a circular polarizing filter, an ND8, 16, 32, as well as an ND8 and an ND16 with the polarizer on it as well. It also comes with this little lens cleaner brush, which I've got about 6 of them now, and I don't think I've used any of them once. So if you like using them, let me know how you use them, because I'm always afraid to go rubbing that little felt tip up against any of my lenses. It just seems like it's gonna get them dirty. Like what is that about? So now that you've got all these filters, what do they do exactly? Basically, they cut an amount of light to where you can expose for longer and longer to make the motion look smoother and smoother. Now I've taken a few shots with and without the filters on the Dji Mavic. And first off, here's an example of the circular polarizing filter As you can see, when you rotate the filter, it cuts a certain amount of glare from the sun depending on the sun's position. This works best when you're facing the sun as opposed to looking the opposite direction of the sun. Here's a quick example of the motion blur that's in the footage when you use the ND filters. As you can see, the image on the left is a lot blurrier than the image on the right, and that's going to give you the illusion of motion while it's playing back at these slower frame rates. You can pause this video at any time to see the difference between the videos. Moving right along, I'm just going to show you a few different examples. You may have to go back and look closely to see the difference between the two, but most of the time the images on the left are going to look a little bit smoother, a little bit more fluid, but both of these were shot at 24 frames a second. I tried to get it synced up as best I could. It was kind of difficult as flying the drone in the exact same path through trees can be kind of challenging. If you look closely, you can see that the image is a lot more choppy in the right-hand image. As you look here, you can see that it looks smeary on the left-hand image, which gives you the perception of motion over the pavement, where the right is crystal clear and can give you kind of a jittery effect. So using these filters will allow you to get more usable, smoother looking shots at the expense of crystal clear sharpness, but you're never going to notice the sharpness or the smeariness when you're panning or moving or just watching the video in general. It's more the feel that the video gives you, less than the actual image quality. So this is really one of those times where you need to forget everything you think you should be looking at to get solid image quality out of a camera and start going with how it actually integrates into the video. And you got to look at the overall picture, how everything's kind of coming together. Video's got a lot more moving parts to it that you have to take into account. You've got the camera stabilization, you've got the movement that you're making, you've got the frame rate, you've got the shutter speed, you got ISO, you got all kinds of different things coming together to make something that is pleasing to look at. Now, I'm not the best video maker out there, but hopefully this little insight into what ND filters are, why to use them, and what kind of difference they make is helpful to somebody out there that might just be starting out. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.